You open the app. Maybe it's a game. Maybe it's a show you've already watched 3 times. Maybe it's just scrolling through a world that isn't yours. And somewhere in those first few minutes, something in your body relaxes. Not because something good happened, just because you left. You didn't plan to stay that long, but an hour passed, then another. And honestly, that time didn't feel wasted. It felt like the only part of the day that was actually yours. People around you don't always understand that. They call it avoidance. They say you're hiding. They talk about it like it's a weakness you need to fix, a symptom of something broken inside you. Like you're choosing a lesser version of life because you can't handle the real one. But here's what they don't say, and what almost nobody explains correctly. Your brain isn't malfunctioning when it prefers virtual spaces. It's doing exactly what it was built to do. And the reason it works so well has less to do with laziness and everything to do with how your nervous system learned to survive long before you ever picked up a controller or opened a screen. This isn't about gaming addiction or screen dependency. Those conversations exist and they matter, but they're not this one. This is about something quieter and more specific. Why, for certain people, the digital world doesn't just feel entertaining, it feels more real, more safe, and sometimes more meaningful than physical life, and why that experience carries a kind of quiet shame that it absolutely should not. There's a concept in neuroscience called predictive processing. Your brain isn't a passive receiver of experience. It's constantly running a simulation, a working model of what it expects reality to be, and then comparing that prediction to what actually happens. When the gap between prediction and reality is too wide, too often, your nervous system treats that as a threat. Not danger in a physical sense, but stress, dysregulation, the low-grade exhaustion of a world that keeps surprising you in ways that cost something. Now think about what virtual environments do. They operate inside fixed rules. The game tells you what the objectives are. The show tells you when the tension is coming and how it resolves. The digital space responds to your input in consistent, learnable patterns. Your brain's predictive system doesn't just relax there, it thrives, because finally, the world is behaving the way it said it would. Dr. Jack Panksepp, whose work on emotional neuroscience changed how researchers understand human motivation, identified a core emotional system he called the seeking drive. It's not simply about wanting things, it's the neurological reward of pursuing, exploring, and making sense of an environment. And here's what's significant. That drive activates most powerfully in response to clear, achievable goals with immediate feedback, which is almost never how real life works, but it's exactly how well-designed virtual experiences work. This isn't a coincidence. This is design meeting deep biology. For many people, especially those who grew up in unpredictable environments, emotionally inconsistent households, chronic social rejection, environments where the rules kept changing without explanation, the nervous system adapted. It learned to read for danger and ambiguity. It became hypersensitive to uncertainty. And real life, with its unresolved conversations, unclear social cues, and outcomes that take months or years to reveal themselves, became genuinely taxing in a way that's hard to describe to someone who doesn't feel it that way. Virtual life offered something different, not perfection, but clarity. The kind of clarity the nervous system has been quietly craving for years without knowing that's what it needed. Now add the social layer, because this is where it gets even more precise. Human beings have a fundamental need for what psychologists call felt understanding, the experience of being known, seen, and responded to accurately by another person. John Bowlby's attachment research showed that when that experience is unreliable in early life, people develop strategies to manage the pain of emotional uncertainty. Some become anxious, some become avoidant, many become both, and all of those strategies share one thing. They're exhausting to maintain in face-to-face interaction, where the stakes feel real and the feedback is immediate and often ambiguous. Online, the stakes shift. You can think before you respond. You can craft how you're seen. You can find communities of people who share your specific frequency, your humor, your interests, your particular way of seeing things without the noise of physical proximity that real-world socializing demands. For someone whose nervous system learned early that closeness sometimes hurts, that filtered version of connection isn't fake. It's often the first place they've ever felt genuinely understood. And this is where it's worth pausing to say something clearly. This pattern is not better or worse than preferring physical experience. Some people are energized by the unpredictability of live interaction. Some find the social ambiguity of a crowded room exciting rather than draining. Neither wiring is the correct one. They're just different adaptations, shaped by different histories, different nervous systems, different childhoods.
But here's the counterintuitive layer, the part that almost never gets said. The people who find the most comfort in virtual life are often not escaping because they feel nothing in reality. They're escaping because they feel everything. The emotional volume of real life isn't too low for them, it's too high. The unspoken tension in a room, the uncertainty of a text that hasn't been answered, the weight of a future that keeps refusing to clarify itself. Virtual environments don't numb that sensitivity. They give it somewhere to rest, somewhere that won't suddenly shift the rules or disappear without warning. There's even research on this. A study published in the journal Computers in Human Behavior found that individuals with higher emotional sensitivity reported significantly greater feelings of social belonging and self-expression in online environments compared to offline ones. Not because online life is more real, but because for that particular type of nervous system, it's more manageable. And manageable, for someone who has lived in chronic overwhelm, can feel like a miracle. The cost, though, and there is always a cost, is that the relief doesn't transfer. You can spend 3 hours in a world that made complete sense, step back into real life, and find it just as loud and unresolved as you left it. The nervous system gets a break, but it doesn't develop new capacity. The gap stays the same. Sometimes, quietly, without you noticing, it grows a little wider. That's not a moral failure, it's not weakness, it's just how nervous systems work. Rest restores energy, but it doesn't, on its own, build tolerance for what drained it in the first place. Which brings us to the one practical shift that actually moves something. If virtual life feels better because it offers clarity, predictability, and a real sense of progress, then the work isn't to force yourself away from it. The work is to slowly, deliberately introduce those same conditions into small corners of real life. Not overhaul everything at once. Not throw yourself into social situations that feel genuinely threatening. Just one small domain where you define the rules, set a clear objective, and give yourself honest feedback on real progress. A creative skill, a physical practice, a project with a beginning, a middle, and an end that exists outside a screen. Something where your competence is visible and doesn't disappear when you close the tab. That sounds almost too simple, but for a nervous system running on years of hypervigilance, small and consistent is genuinely how new patterns form. Neuroscientist Dr. Michael Merzenich's work on neuroplasticity showed that the brain doesn't rewire through intensity alone. It rewires through repetition of new experience in conditions of low threat. The brain doesn't need drama to change. It needs safety practiced in small doses until safety starts to feel familiar. You are not someone who can't handle real life. You are someone whose nervous system learned to protect you from a version of real life that wasn't always safe. The preference makes sense, the relief makes sense. The hours that felt like the only honest ones in the day, those make sense too. And the path forward isn't to shame yourself out of the coping strategies that got you here. It's to understand them clearly enough that you can slowly and without pressure start building a real life that your nervous system doesn't need to escape from. That's not a destination, it's a direction, and it starts smaller than you think. If something in this felt like language you've been looking for without knowing it existed, the psychology underneath it goes deeper still. Why certain people feel things more intensely than others, and what that sensitivity actually costs, and what it quietly gives. That's a thread worth following.